A controversial vote in northern Iraq as Kurds campaign for a state to call home. Regional powers warn of civil war. I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is the upcoming Kurdish independence referendum. The Kurdish region of northern Iraq is set to vote next month on whether to break away from Baghdad. It's been called a first step towards independence. But if the rest of the region gets its way, it'll be over before even a single ballot is cast. Turkey and Iran have condemned the referendum, with Ankara calling it a grave mistake that could lead to a civil war. Both Turkey and Iran have significant Kurdish populations, and they're concerned about separatist aspirations in their own countries. The US and European governments also warn now is not the right time, saying it could further destabilize the region. Randolph Nogel has more.
Kurdistan is different. As a nation, we are different. As geography, we are different. And Iraq is an artificial state. It was put together to keep some balances. We were promised genuine partnership, but we were never treated as partners. We have suffered a great deal. We have suffered under the successive regimes in Iraq, be that under the Sunni Arab rule or currently under the Shia Arab rule.
In the minds of Kurdish nationalists, it's a dream 99 years deferred.
We are going to hold the referendum. For 100 years, we've been struggling for this day to come, to become an independent state.
If the referendum for Kurdish independence comes to pass, a majority vote for independence is widely expected, despite the fact that there are deep divisions among Iraqi Kurds over the issue.
The question is, can these politicians guarantee that these problems will not get bigger and we will not have a clash between the political parties? This question has to be answered before having the referendum.
The plebiscite will be held in 3 provinces over which the Autonomous Kurdistan Regional Government, or KRG, has control: Erbil, Dohuk, and Sulaymaniyah, in addition to areas disputed by the Kurdish and Baghdad governments. Of particular interest is Kirkuk, an oil-rich province also claimed by Turkmen and Arabs, now controlled by Kurdish forces after the Iraqi army was pushed out by Daesh.
According to the agreement between the Iraqi federal government and the KRG Kurdish regional government, the Peshmerga should withdraw from areas which they have advanced after the start of the operation of liberating Mosul.
The Kurdish fighting force, known as the Peshmerga, were instrumental in diminishing Daesh's control in northern Iraq. Still, the US has insisted a referendum would pose a risk to regional stability.
And we've called on the Kurdistan regional government to reconsider the decision, and we urge them to pursue a dialogue with the central government on the basis of the Iraqi constitution. All eyes right now must remain fixed on the enemy of Daesh.
Turkey, which shares a border with Iraq, is also opposed to the referendum on similar grounds. Ankara insists on maintaining Iraq's territorial integrity.
The decision by the regional government would contribute to instability in the region. It also violates the constitution of Iraq.
A Kurdish delegation is in Baghdad to hear possible concessions in exchange for postponing the vote. On the table is financial assistance in the range of $10 to $12 billion, which the KRG owes to public work contractors, civil servants, and Peshmerga fighters who haven't been paid in full for several months. Baghdad stopped payments to the KRG after the Kurds began exporting oil independently through a pipeline to Turkey. On the political front is the opportunity to settle disputes over Kirkuk's oil reserves. With the KRG facing opposition from those on which it politically, militarily, and economically relies, some wonder if a referendum at this stage is practical, or whether it's being used as a bargaining chip to strengthen the hand of an ethnic minority that has felt politically repressed for decades. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by Matthew Breiser. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan and is now a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And from Erbil, we have Dindar Zebari. He's a deputy minister of the Kurdistan regional government and also the head of the High Committee to respond to international reports in the KRG's Council of Ministers. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Breiser, tell me why you think this referendum's a bad idea.
Well, the U.S. government thinks it's a bad idea. Look, the Kurdish people are the largest stateless people in the world. And according to international law, a peoples that has emerged from a process of decolonization has the right to vote on its self-determination. That's a moral and legalistic point. I just think practically it's a bad idea because now is a time when all of Iraq, the Iraqi Kurdistan and federal Iraq are struggling economically, struggling to defeat ISIS, though on the path of victory together with the U.S.-led coalition, and really need to get some of the foreign relations issues lined up to be economically viable, and I mean in particular relations with Turkey.
Dindar Zabari, now is not the time, is what a lot of people are saying, including the Iranians, including Turkey, including the Americans, and Baghdad itself. Tell me why you think it is the time.
Thank you for the opportunity. I believe it's time. It's time for several reasons. The failure of the continuous efforts of Kurdistan regional government throughout the last many years with following Iraqi governments in terms of consensus and of course real participation and genuine participation in the Iraqi political process. It's a time because in terms of security, Iraq has seen collapse since 2003 and prior to 2003, but mainly after 2003, where several other components of militants have occurred rise in Iraq for years, prior to IS, prior to Daesh, and they all have been a threat to KRG region being part of the Iraq. And also it's a time because federalism in Iraq is only on the paper. It has not been implemented, not been indicated as an effort of the government of Baghdad for many years. All the process of federalism and consensus in terms of the participation, the voluntary participation of the Kurdish people or Kurdistan region within Iraq after 2003 has led to failure in all different sort of decentralization in the Iraqi state.
So let me put it to you this way then. Sorry to interrupt you. Let me put it to you this way then. If you can get a proper federalism, if you can get proper autonomy, you can win more concessions from Baghdad, would you postpone or cancel it?
Unfortunately, in practice, it has been an effort. All different allies throughout many years. United Nations office in Iraq for many years. Advice being given to Baghdad for many years. 15 UN resolutions passed on Iraq for the renewal of UNAMI in Iraq has pushed for the federalism. The allies have pushed for the federalism. I believe something is wrong in Iraq. This country has been put together by force. It has been kept by force together, and unfortunately it's not working.
It's not working. I mean, the man makes a point, right? People, Ambassador Bryce, are talking about this referendum destabilizing the region. Like, what planet are you living on? Iraq's already a mess. How much worse can it get, right? Maybe this should be given a chance.
I strongly agree that it's hard to be less stable than Iraq currently is or Syria is. But the goal here, I think, shouldn't be so much a look at what was good for the region in terms of stability, but for the Kurdish people themselves. As I said in the beginning, they certainly have a moral right and a legal right to pursue independence. But referenda, as we saw in the case of Brexit, don't always produce the best outcome for the people themselves. I mean, I would argue, I believe Brexit will eventually be overturned. I think that's a different issue, obviously. Right. But my point is that right now, until big pieces such as the economic relationship with federal Iraq is sorted out and energy revenues, and until the Kurdish people have a way to export their hydrocarbon wealth in an agreed way through Turkey and in other directions, it's hard to see in a practical way how you could have a viable state.
Dindar Zabari, Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, saying this risks civil war. You have Turkey, who's an ally of the KRG, not happy. You have the United States not happy with this. You have the situation of Kirkuk, for example, where you have the Arab and Turkmen who are not going to take this lying down, right? Are you prepared for the worst eventualities? Are you prepared for a huge mess?
We already have passed through many of those challenges throughout the 90s, beginning of 1991. and only by the support or through the support of Turkey and Western society, Western countries, KRG region, Kurdistan region has survived. We have seen years without budget. We have seen years without proper support from international community, even later on. But all of these has been an experience. KRG voluntarily joined Baghdad after 2003, promising a new Iraq, promising new support, promising decentralization, failed. Now, in terms of the draft of the oil and gas law with Baghdad, in 2007, the draft is ready, finalized. Still, after 10 years, no further negotiations on that. UN also has failed to push Iraq for the implementation of the Iraqi constitution. There are no guarantees if Kurdistan gives up the date of referendum or referendum path. There are no guarantees, genuine guarantees. I don't mean an ambassador statement in Baghdad will be enough. I believe what will be the guarantees for Kurdistan future of the people of Kurdistan, security-wise, economic-wise, political-wise. I think it has to be at the upper level Security Council and at the upper level allies, which is definitely the capitals, Washington, D.C., and many other strongest capital to give assurances for the people of Kurdistan that future will be decisive for them for their own protection as well as for the stability of the region. So far, KRG has proven as a fact of stability to neighboring countries. For years, Turkey is in collaboration with KRG for the security of the border.
So why
Iran
change
is in collaboration with KRG with the security of the border.
Why change any of that?
KRG has been a fact. No, KRG has been a fact of stability for these countries, and it will continue definitely with that. Turkey, it's a main ally for the KRG in many different aspects, and has been a very successful relationship. By the way, export of oil today through Turkey, it's not a gift given by Baghdad. It has been a support given by Turkey and different authorities in terms of the support of the people of Kurdistan. So frankly, to say, Turkey has been more of support than Baghdad for the economy as well as for the well-being of the people of Kurdistan, even through the angelic basis in 90s that has provided provide comfort for the people of Kurdistan. So failure of Baghdad, no linkage with Baghdad, not feeling of responsibility, 2 million IDPs in Kurdistan from Iraq itself, not a single payment or support to the budget of the KRG, disclosure of KRG into international conferences and rest of it to highlight the success and the positive impact of KRG, even within Iraq. Right. Iraq deliberately has chosen to demonize KRG for years, and people of Kurdistan is definitely at the end of that patience.
Mr. Zabari, the Kurdish people in the north of Iraq are hardly unanimous when it comes to whether they want independence. You'd be familiar with Mahmoud Othman, veteran politician. I've interviewed him a few times. He was quoted recently as saying, before this referendum, we need to have Kurdish unity and some sort of an understanding with Baghdad. We do not have either. Now, I'm going to put my emphasis on Kurdish unity. There is no Kurdish unity. There is no consensus on this. Are you willing to back down if the Kurdish people decide that they don't want to break away?
This is a democratic process. Results of referendum, new countries will expect 100% that people will vote in favor of one line of choose. Definitely, it's a process of democratization, process of democracy, referendum itself. People of Kurdistan will be given the right to choose whether they would like Kurdistan to become independent or not. This has to be a choice given to the people of Kurdistan. And in terms of the process of the referendum, definitely and certainly major political parties, KDP, PUK, including dozens of political parties, the political elite in Kurdistan, have chosen and have set up a high committee for referendum, and this high committee is composed of all different ethnicities, nationalities, and all the major and middle political parties in Kurdistan region. Yesterday they have been in Baghdad. They came back from Baghdad. Negotiations are ongoing with Baghdad. It's a process, and this process is not something black and white. It needs evaluation. It needs assessment. It needs, of course, all different channels of communications. But process already has started. This is the main bottom line of it.
Yeah, the process has started there. Those calling for a postponement, a cancellation, but it seems as if this is going ahead as we speak. It's going to happen in September. I want to talk about Daesh for a moment now. Daesh is at the center of the argument against the referendum happening. Let's have a listen to what Masoud Barzani had to say about Daesh and about Mosul.
I have big concerns about the situation in Mosul and about post-liberation, because the end of Daesh in Mosul doesn't mean the end of Daesh. Those factors, the environment that brought it into Mosul, have not changed. I have a big concern about the future of the area. I hope I will be wrong.
So, Daesh at the center of this, and I want to bring in Matthew Breiser here. Part of the argument is that there's a fight against Daesh, and this referendum will allow people to take their eye off the ball. Daesh would probably love this referendum to happen, and this would scupper the fight against Daesh. It sounds like a nice theory, but is it true? How is it true?
Well, I mean, maybe that's going a little bit too far, but what is true is that these big national struggles, whether it be a referendum that's a complicated process, as Mr. Zabari was just saying, or the ongoing negotiations between the Kurdistani regional government and the federal government of Iraq over a myriad of issues, or the fight against Daesh, or getting the economy going again. All these things require great effort by national leaders, by local leaders, and a lot of time. And so, you know, sometimes a referendum has a bit of a bread and circus impact. It helps to resolve internal political problems, again, like in the case of David Cameron and Brexit. Right. But it creates a whole new range of problems that are that suck all the oxygen out of the political system and make it very difficult to concentrate on what other priorities may be out there. And it's hard to imagine a higher priority than defeating Daesh.
Okay, so Dindar Zabari. Use that oxygen right now. There's limited oxygen right now. Use it to defeat Daesh and then have your referendum. How about that?
I believe, again, the experience with Baghdad in the fight against IS or Daesh has been another very much successful one. It has been successful in terms of the combat, but in terms of the supplies and inclusion of Peshmerga forces within Iraqi national defense system or support to Peshmerga forces throughout last 3 years, it has been quite failure from Baghdad. Baghdad has stopped, has been rejecting many of those supplies to Peshmerga forces, even during the time of the battle with IS. Daesh. That's why being part of the state of Iraq in terms of the IS defeat or IS battle, I don't think it will change anymore. Sorry, it will not be very much relevant. In contrary to that, KRG by itself, by its own relations, by its own reliance on the international coalition from Erbil, it has been more successful, more organized under one national command. It has only the only forces in Iraq throughout Iraq as a unified force in terms of the instruction and leadership. And we have all seen the Peshmerga success throughout the last 3 years. So definitely is not very much linked to the state of Iraq or being part of the Iraq or being part of the negotiations with Iraq. Because as we know all, the collapse of Iraqi forces in 2013 and 14 and handover most of those equipments and machinery as well as land to the Daesh, that has been a quite collapse and an experience that, frankly, KRG does not want anymore to experience with new Iraq or with the rest of the Iraq. It wants to have a boundaries very clear in terms of protection of its own people, and those boundaries have been fully should be supported by the forces from KRG, not very much as before collapsed by the Iraqi forces in the past.
Is that a reasonable argument, Matthew Breiser, that they earned the right to have their own country, given that they were the only or one of the few respectable fighting forces in the country at the time when the Iraqi army folded, when Daesh was spreading through?
I think it's definitely a legitimate argument, on top of the fact that Iraqi Kurdistan has become a fully functioning political entity or state, and therefore merits the opportunity at self-determination. My point, again, is simply the fundamental point is that there are so many factors that need to be in place for a new political entity to thrive, to survive. So many relationships that have to be built. They're not in place right now. So it's understandable that the emotions are there, that certain Iraqi Kurdish leaders say enough is enough. Baghdad has been quite problematic, hasn't been helpful, and you've got obviously the Shia split with Kurds and pro-Iranian political forces in Baghdad. Very complex picture. Understandable that people get emotional at some point and say enough is enough, but you know, having an independence referendum, if it passes, it may not, but most likely will, and if it does, though, that's the equivalent in a negotiation of kids in a football match and one kid gets angry and picks up his ball and goes home. You can do that once. And then what? You have to live another day.
Right. And you've been at the table in the past. You've been advising the president, the chiefs of staff, and so on at the Security Council. So they call you in now. Washington is not happy with this referendum going ahead right now. It's doing all it can to say, hey, postpone it, think again, and so on. But if it goes ahead, how does this Trump administration balance their policy towards the KRG? Clearly, it's not going to abandon them. But how does it find that middle ground between we're not happy with what you're doing, but we're still your ally and we need you? How does it do that?
My guess is the administration should simply not talk about the referendum and let the political forces on the ground in Iraq decide what happens after, let's say, there is an affirmative vote. My guess is implementation of that vote will be very difficult. And you touched on Kirkuk. I mean, Kirkuk, having a vote in Kirkuk, that's a tinderbox, right? And that's really opening up a whole new area of conflict. So it's not clear to me that this, even if it is a yes vote, it will be implemented. So if I were the Trump administration, I'd let that play out. But in the meantime, do everything possible to shore up my relations with Turkey, encouraging Turkey and the Iraqi Kurdish government to work closely together. And then what my friends and colleagues, our ambassador in Baghdad, Doug Sullivan, and others do every day, which is try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again and do everything possible to build connectivity between the various factions in Iraq.
Dindar Zabari, we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you the final word here. What's your message to your friends who are not happy with the referendum? What's your message to Turkey? What's your message to the Americans? They're your friends, but they don't want this referendum to go ahead. In 30 seconds, speak to them. Tell them what you think.
I believe future independent Kurdistan will be a fact of stability. It will be definitely in a partnership with those regional countries, regional states. It has proven that. This is not only a slogan or a promise, it has been an experience and implementation. Failure of Iraq and being part of the failure state will not contribute anything more. I believe it's time for the Iraqi people to decide for themselves what sort of political statute, what sort of political definition they would like to choose for their own sake and for their own future. And this has to be the right of the people of Iraq, and including Iraqi Kurdistan.
Big month ahead for the KRG, for Iraq and the region as a whole. I've got to move on. Dindar Zabari and Matthew Breiser, it's been a pleasure having both of you on the program. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Hong Kong's pro-democracy activists become political prisoners. Did the city's court cave in to pressure from Beijing? And Iranian evolution. We speak with best-selling novelist Azar Nafisi about Iran, how it's changed, and where she thinks it's headed. 3 years ago, student activists in Hong Kong led thousands of people in calling for greater democracy. Today, 3 of those protest leaders are in jail until 2018. Activists have called the court's decision an act of intimidation, and many see it as a sure sign of political interference from China, something Hong Kong's chief executive denies. So, did the courts bow to pressure from Beijing? And if people lose faith in their justice system, what will it mean for Hong Kong's protesters? Natalie Perhonen takes a look.
In China's most liberal city, protests are not unusual. Hong Kong's people regularly exercise their right to demonstrate. But this time, they have been marching for 3 of their own. Activists Nathan Law, Joshua Wong and Alex Chow. They've been sentenced for 6 to 8 months for taking part in the 2014 pro-democracy protests. They're also some of the most prominent voices calling for universal suffrage.
I hope Hong Kong people will not give up. Victory is ours. When we come out of prison next year, we want to see a Hong Kong full of hope. We want to see a group of Hong Kong people who refuse to give up. This is my last wish before I go to prison. Everyone, carry on. Don't give up.
The trio had originally been given community service and suspended jail terms, but the Justice Secretary, Rimsky Yuen, appealed the leniency of the sentences. Democracy activists have accused the government of bowing to pressure from Beijing. Hong Kong's leader says there was no political interference.
Rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people are protected under the Basic Law. But the exercise of these rights and freedoms, as pointed out by the court, is not without limit. They have, first of all, to be law-abiding.
The 2014 umbrella movement exposed the deep political divisions in the territory. For 79 days, protesters brought parts of the financial hub to a standstill. Their calls for greater democracy and the right to vote for their city's leader were heard around the world, but they went unanswered by the central government. This year, the city is marking 20 years of reunification with the mainland and 2 decades of the one country, two systems formula. The model gives Hong Kong's government responsibility for the city's affairs, and the central government is meant to take a hands-off approach. Chinese President Xi Jinping has hailed it as a success, and there are many in Hong Kong who agree. But Xi has also called any challenges to Beijing's authority impermissible. For the generation that has grown up since the handover, there's mounting concern the motherland's reach has grown alongside them. The city's youth activists have been some of the loudest voices pushing for democratic reform, some through protest and others through elected office. When the Newsmakers met Nathan Law in June, he was still the youngest lawmaker in the Legislative Council.
For most of the Hong Kong people, we treasure democracy, and only by having democracy, a true unification could be achieved, because if you are just under authoritarian regime, there's not a reunification, but all the dissidents are being silent. So that's not the kind of united that we are striving for.
Law and his fellow activists have urged Hong Kongers to continue to protest for democratic rights. But will people choose to follow in their footsteps when there can be such a high price for civil disobedience? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Hong Kong is Emily Lau. She's a former member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council and a former chairwoman of the Democratic Party. And for The View from Beijing, we have Xu Kandou. He's a senior journalist with China Radio International and an adjunct professor at Renmin University of China. Thanks both of you for joining us. Xu, if I can begin with you. With this sentence, more than 6 months for protesting, merely protesting, the message to the youth seems to be, know your place and shut up, or else we'll throw you in jail. Is that accurate?
No. First of all, it's not about the protest. The protest itself, nothing wrong with that. I mean, no, the court ruling is really about part of their behavior, which is illegal. They forced themselves into this government compound, and the guards got injured. So that's the sentence really is about. This is a small part of their behavior. It's not about the protest, first of all. Secondly, I think this is, Hong Kong is known for being rule of law and also judiciary independence. I think everybody should accept and respect the ruling of the Court of Appeal. That's also my personal opinion. I think everybody should do that.
Emily Lau, do you respect the ruling, or was it Beijing who called the shots?
Well, I think our judges were quite independent. I don't think they received orders from Beijing. I still would like to think that our judiciary is independent. But of course, the whole of Hong Kong, we are under tremendous pressure from Beijing, whether it's the judges or the administration or the legislators or the public. I mean, if you come to Hong Kong, you will see a mood of despondency and despair. And the people just feel that we are all sort of suffocating under the pressure of Beijing, and that Beijing seems to be indicating all these things, that they want to crush the pro-democracy movement, which I think is very, very sad.
Suffocating, that's the word used by Emily Lau. Xu, is that true? 20 years on, is that what Beijing is doing? It's tightening the noose over Hong Kong. No longer one country, two systems. Very soon it's going to be one country, one system.
Well, the promise, with the handover of Hong Kong, from Britain to China, that's like a 50 years no change of the current practice of the system in Hong Kong. That's one country, two system. Remember, after Hong Kong was returned to China, you have election of the chief executive. I know some people are not happy with it being not perfect, but also remember, in the 99 years ruling of the colonial rule, there was basically no election at all, no democracy. And secondly, prosperous Hong Kong will serve the interests not only in the Hong Kong government, Hong Kong people, but also the Chinese mainland. So there's no whatever reason to see somehow something wrong or to sabotage the prosperity of Hong Kong. Can I respond a little bit to Emily mentioned about this the desperation, the atmosphere, the mood. I think I understand a little bit. It's partly also economic woes. Young people say after graduation they would be out of the job market basically. So this is very sad. And also there's a widening gap between rich and poor. Of course, this is not only Hong Kong but also in the United States and also in the Chinese mainland. This is an economic problem. I think Hong Kong government and if possible, Beijing would also give a hand to help deal with that problem, to give people some confidence in their future. It's really about the livelihood. This is probably more important than, say, going to the street and protest.
Okay, so Emily Lau, is that what it's all about? The economy rather than Beijing?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think our economy is in a terrible state, but it is true that many young people feel that they cannot find good jobs and that they are really having a tough time, can't even find a decent-sized flat to live in. But it is as I said, the pressure of all these statements, remarks by Beijing and their mouthpieces, in the academia or in the media, others telling Hong Kong what to do and what we should not do. And I tell you, most Hong Kong people just want Beijing to keep the promise that they made in the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, and let us have a high degree of autonomy. As we all know, the central government has so many problems to deal with. Why do they want to bother with Hong Kong? And in Hong Kong, we just want to be left alone so that we can get on with our lives.
So, Ms. Lau, this is what I'm struggling to understand, right? I'm struggling to understand something here. You're saying you'd like to, you hope that the judiciary is independent, or you'd like to think the judiciary is independent, and that in this particular case of these activists initially being given community service and then on appeal by the government, them getting more than 6 months for protesting, you're saying this was an independent judicial decision. On the other hand, you're telling me there's the suffocating pressure from Beijing, people are caving into Beijing, and there's this environment where Beijing is closing in on Hong Kong. This case sounds then like a textbook example of the judiciary caving into that pressure. That's what it is, isn't it? The judiciary is caving into pressure from Beijing.
Well, as I said, I have not seen any evidence of our judges receiving orders from Beijing. But we are criticizing the Secretary for Justice for appealing, for making the appeal so that they can get such hefty sentence, whereas previously the sentences were not that harsh. So the climate has really changed so abruptly, and that's why so many people marched on Sunday. And so it is a suffocating environment, and some people who marched with me said they wanted to leave Hong Kong. And this National People's Congress Standing Committee member, Rita Fan, told the people to leave and to go to Taiwan. And these people said, why should I go to Taiwan? I don't have a Taiwan passport, but I have a British national overseas passport. Rita Fan should help me and others to go to live in the UK.
Shu, do you respect the sincerity of the protesters, both that group in jail and the 22,000 that protested against their imprisonment? Do you respect their sincerity, Shu?
Okay, first of all, I think the government, their acts is in line with the law. They do enjoy the right to go to the appeal court if they think the previous ruling is not proper. Is that right? We have to agree on that.
Fine,
Otherwise,
that's legal.
There's no discussion.
But people aren't happy with that. And I want to ask you, do you respect the sincerity of the protesters?
Let me say, I think they are sincere probably, and also they are concerned about their, say, Hong Kong's future. I do think, they are local residents, they care about their lives, they care about Hong Kong. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we can't afford to be selective. If it's a softer punishment, nothing is wrong. This is a rule of law, judiciary independence. If it's a little bit stiffer, you can't accept it. You are being selective in terms of the rule of law, in terms of judicial independence. That's completely wrong. That's something, I'm sorry, I have to say that's wrong. That's completely wrong. 22,000 protesters on the streets of Hong Kong. Remember, there is 7 million people in Hong Kong. That's only 3% of the population.
That's a lot,
actually.
That
doesn't say anything, probably, about the overall attitudes of Hong Kong.
3% of any population is a massive number. Be that as it may, hold on for a second. 3%, okay, if you took 3% of China's mainland population, they went out onto the streets, let's do the numbers there, that would be massive. Be that as it may, I want you to listen to what Joshua Wong had to say, because the protesters, those who are in jail now, have been called certain names, they've been accused of serving certain agendas. Let's have a little listen to what Joshua Wong had to say.
China pro-communist propaganda claim that we have external force control behind, have foreign government fund, or even claim that, or blame to say that Joshua Wong received the training from US Marine, or I'm one of the CIA agent. And it's really funny. And I would point out that it's not true at all. We have not received any funding outside of Hong Kong. And what we hope is Hong Kong is an international city. So what's wrong for we bring this issue, Hong Kong's democratization, to international community?
Shu, do you accept that that demonization of the protesters, that they're foreign agents, that they're being trained by the CIA and so on, is just wrong? It's crossed the line and it's wrong.
If there's any demonization, obviously that's totally wrong. I don't accept that. I don't think that's right. And also, there's accusation of like Joshua Wong was a CIA agent. Nobody knows that. And I don't think he's an agent of CIA. He's a young student. He's a young man of Hong Kong who is sometimes probably very active in the pursuit of his political ideal. But there's no problem with that. The problem is like if you break the law, you should accept the consequence. You will be punished. Community service is the punishment, and 6 months in prison is also punishment. It's up to the judges. If they make the decision, accept it and respect that.
Right. The 6 months is interesting, Emily Lau, because looking closely at it, under Hong Kong law, if you've spent more than 3 months in jail, you can't run for office for 5 years. So now you have these, these young charismatic people are listening to them, tens of thousands are taking to the streets to support them. It sounds awfully convenient, whether people believe that it's Beijing pulling the strings or whether it's just the Hong Kong government, which is very harsh and draconian. It sounds very convenient and a good opportunity to defang the young charismatic opposition or future leaders of the country. Is that what's happening?
Well, they are going to appeal. Do you know that? This case is not over. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
So this is not over. And anyway, if you look at the people who have received Nobel Peace Prize, many of them have spent many, many years in jail. So maybe it will increase their political capital.
Okay, good point.
So anyway,
good point.
I think these people admit that they have broken the law. And the civil disobedience, maybe it's not that civil in some cases. So anyway, we think the Hong Kong government should not, be so vindictive, especially when Carrie Lam said when she assumed office, she wants to create a much better atmosphere. But now we see these people being sent to jail. We see legislators being disqualified. So as I said, the mood is very, very dark.
So, Shu, Nobel laureates have been in prison. This increases their political capital, according to Emily Lau. Isn't this going to backfire, that the government is making heroes of these protesters?
Well, I think you are probably right in pointing out that this could be like a self-defeating if there is a political consideration, which I don't think there is for Hong Kong government or for Beijing government to remember. And you talked about like a Nobel Peace Prize. You talk about like he's a possible leader of China. I can say that to you. This is a very little chance for him to become the leader of China, unfortunately. This is a totally different situation. And remember, you know, nobody fears like Joshua Wong become a legislator, go to the election and be elected. You know, there are opposition leaders, opposition legislators in this legislature. There are always, you know, opposition, you know, voices over there.
But
this
no political career starts at 50 years old.
The freedom of speech.
Sure, no political career starts at 50 years old. When you have people in their early 20s that are galvanizing the masses to protest for something that they're very passionate about, that creates a spark,
Very
doesn't it?
good. You very good. You mentioned about his age. You know, he started his political like activism at a young age of 14. Age, I think, you know, students should be in school and study their textbook probably. But remember, who organized, who encouraged the young students to go to the street? It's a civil disobedience. You know, professors from universities over there. And now, you know, some people coming out calling for the professors to shoulder some responsibility. Where is their accountability? And they are free from any punishment, while the young people who went ahead and they're now being put behind the bars. I'm not sure that's completely fair over there.
Okay, so Emily Lau, is it the professor's fault encouraging these young people to take to the streets?
I don't think so. I think most of the people who took to the streets hold adult identity cards. I think they are all free-thinking people. So you say it's somebody else's fault?
Shu, is it somebody else's fault?
No, nobody is any. You know, if there's any fault, these are the young leaders, their own fault. You know, like if you read the court ruling, the documents over there, you know, they showed no remorse about their illegal behavior. They don't say it is wrong. Instead, they take pride in their you know, illegal behavior, illegal acts over there. I think, you know, they are brave. If they are courageous enough, just go accept. I don't understand why people, you know, go to the street and protest. Protest against what?
Well, they clearly feel they have very important issues they need to protest over. You disagree, and I'm glad we've had this conversation. Shu Kin-wo and Emily Lau, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Standing up for the nuclear deal means standing up to Iran's enemies, standing up in front of the US, Israel, and some small countries in our region. We call ourselves the heroes of fighting arrogance.
When Iranian President Hassan Rouhani was sworn in for a second term earlier this month, he emphasized growing ties with the rest of the world. That was music to the ears of the nation's reformists, who have long been pushing for more global engagement and progressive policies. But the nation's ties with the US seem to be deteriorating. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization says if the US quits the nuclear deal, they're ready to restart high-level uranium enrichment within the week. So, how is Iran positioning itself in 2017? And is the country really changing from previous decades? Well, my guest today is a renowned author and professor who knows Iran inside and out. Azar Nafisi, she wrote the best-selling novel Reading Lolita in Tehran. Based on her experiences, it tells the story of a rebellious professor who holds a secret book club where her students resist the regime by studying banned Western literature. Ma'am, it's a pleasure having you on the program. You left Iran in about 20 years ago, and you decided it was intolerable, and you went to the United States, and you've been outside for a long, long time. I wonder, in the year 2017, if you were still back in Iran teaching at the university, would you also leave, or would there be enough good within the system to feel that you can contribute within the society? What would you do?
Well, you know, I mentioned at the end of Reading Lolita in Tehran that I left Iran, but Iran never left me. So I feel that wherever I am in the world, I am carrying the best that Iran has always offered me, and I would never ever leave it. But that aside, things have changed, but they have not basically changed. The good news is all goes to Iran's civil society. I feel that that is where my hope lies. I'm not optimistic, but I'm hopeful because women, journalists, writers, poets, minorities, all of them have resisted this system, and all of them have tried to change it. And the best signs of change come from within the regime itself. Look at where the former head of the parliament, Mr. Karoubi, and former Prime Minister, Mr. Mousavi, are now. They are the ones now under house arrest, and they are the ones now who have changed because of Iran's vibrant civil society, and that's where my hope lies.
There were those who were a part of the Green Movement who trusted the system enough to want to vote for President Rouhani, to work within the system, even though they felt that the system wasn't ideal. They were giving him their support, and they felt he was their best shot at change and reform. With that in mind, do you trust President Rouhani as a moderate reformer?
Well, you know, my trust goes always to the people. I mean, my job as a writer and as a supporter of human rights belongs to that space within the society. And I will use all my power to rely on the positive things that Mr. Rouhani doesn't say and be very alert to the negative things. That is my role. I feel that different strata of society have different roles to play. Those reformers come from within the regime, and they could maybe change much better from within than someone like me can. But from without the regime, I still have hope that we can change the system without violence.
You know, for many people, they wouldn't know much about Afghanistan if it wasn't for, say, the kite runner. And for many of them, it's just the kite runner and Khalid Hosseini's view of his home country through his work of fiction and other books. How do you feel as a writer about the responsibility that you have, that for many people, their only window into Iran would be through your eyes, through your prism, through your filter, that the only way they know about Iran would be through how you see it? Is that a responsibility you take on, or a responsibility that makes you a little bit nervous?
Well, you know, I don't want the world to see Iran only through my prism. One reason I wrote Reading Lolita in Tehran was that I wanted people to see that other Iran, which they were deprived of seeing. They were seeing Iran mainly through the prism of the regime, and I wanted to tell them that Iran has vibrant youth movement, that people in Iran are connected to the world, although that connection has dangers for them. I wanted them to see that the students in Iran are even know much better about America than some of my students in America do. That is what I wanted them to see. But definitely, my view is just one view, and democracy means to look at the country through different points of view and then choose the view that you feel is the fairest and the best.
As an Iranian-American, that makes you an Iranian and an American, at this particular time,
yes.
Which of the two countries are you more optimistic about?
Well, you know, I'm not optimistic, but I'm hopeful about both countries. First of all, immigrants come to United States with their pain and anguish, living everything that you loved, everything that you were born into, is a very, very traumatic affair. So, but we also come to this country with hope, because we come with hope for a new life. And, you know, we also bring a gift to America. The America today that is looking towards Mr. Trump and saying, no, we don't want this. we want to change this system by being who we are, by sticking to our values, reminds me of the Iran that said the same thing in the face of the Islamic Republic. So this is where the two people meet. With having trust in their own values and in their own principles. This is where, again, you have women. Again, you have called people within humanities and liberal arts and sciences. You have the judges, as you did in Iran, standing up and saying, we also have a share in creating our destiny. And so I hope that we stand up to Mr. Trump and his values the way we stood up to the Islamic Republic and their values.
And very finally, as a writer, do you feel that a writer has a responsibility to have a balanced view of the politics? Or a storyteller, no more, no less, or an activist maybe even?
I think that a writer, as a writer, not as a person, because as a person, I'm also an activist, but as a writer, my duty first and foremost is to the truth. And truth is always dangerous, because once you know it, once you know what is going on in Syria, once you know what is going on in Iraq, once you know what is going on within the administration in America, you cannot remain silent. Because if you do remain silent, then you are complicit in what is happening, in the crimes that are happening, even if you're a victim. So for me, when I was in Iran, my duty was to the truth, to reveal what I saw was going on in Iran. And that hasn't changed when I have come to America. That is why I wrote Reading Lolita as a critique of not Islam and Iran, but as a critique of the Islamic Republic of Iran, of abusing religion as an ideology. And when I came to America, I wrote Republic of Imagination, not as critique of American people, but as a critique of America that was becoming corrupt and a system that was not working the way it should have worked.
Azar Nafisi, it was wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Next time, we debate the value of Confederate statues in the United States. Are they a reminder of the country's racist past or a tribute? Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.